When you're working in Fusion, every time you manually drag in the same nodes and make the same changes, you're wasting minutes that can add up to hours. Now, in this video, we're going to be asking two questions. What tasks are we always repeating, and how can we make them instant? I'm going to show you how to make your own custom nodes and presets, and I'll show you a free web tool that makes the whole process way easier, so you can spend less time clicking and more time editing. Now let's start with the settings you always find yourself changing. So for example, I've got a particular shade of red that I use all the time because it's the color of our logo. Anytime I want to make a graphic with that color, I have to pull up a background node, then go to the inspector, click on the color swatch, make sure I'm in the RGB sliders mode, so I've got access to the hex code selection, and then type in the color I need and click OK. Now that's a lot of steps I have to do each time. So I want to create a version of the background node that already has that color dialed in. One way would be to change the default color. To do that, once you've made your changes, you can right-click on the node and select Settings, Save Default. Now, every time I add a new background node, it would default to red. You can do that for any setting on a node, or even multiple settings. Let's take a look at a Text Plus node, and we'll change the font, the size, and we'll add a bit of text in there, and save that as the new default. Now, if I delete that and bring in a new Text Plus node, all those settings are already changed. You can set it back to always load with the default settings by right-clicking and selecting Settings, Reset Default. Now if I drag a new version of that node in, the font and the size are back to normal. But I don't want my new settings to be the default. I just want there to be a version of that node available for the times when I need it. In that case, I'm going to right-click again on this background node and press Settings, Save As, and that's going to create a .setting file. Where you end up saving this file is going to be really important. I'll put the location of these Fusion folders in the description so you can navigate to them easily. In this case, I want to navigate to the macros folder and call the file something like background red. I'm putting it in there because that will make it show up as a node within Fusion, just like any other one. So now, if I hit Shift and the spacebar to call up the Select tool pop-up, I can just type red and it will appear as a node I can add to my flow. You can even do this for a group of nodes. For example, if I've got to set up a 3D scene, I know I'll always need a 3D merge to connect things to, a 3D camera, and a 3D renderer, and I'll need to connect them all together. On the renderer node, I'll enable lighting and shadows because I'll probably have those turned on most of the time. I'm going to select all three, right-click one of them, and go to Settings, Save All As. I'll give it the name Scene 3D and save it in that same macros folder as before. Now if I hit Shift and the spacebar to call up the Select tool pop-up, I'll start typing the word Scene and I'll see it show up. Select that and all those nodes are added to the node graph, already connected together, and with the settings I changed on the renderer all set up and ready to go. New nodes like this usually show up instantly within Fusion once you save them, but if you can't see them, you might need to restart Resolve. Now, before we go any further, we do need to talk about the performance of your machine. Because if you're trying to speed up your work, you're going to have a really hard time making a cool graphic or a cool composite if you can't play it back in real time. So here are a few things you can try. There are a few hidden controls that you can find if you right-click anywhere in the transport control area, which is this section near the playback buttons. Just make sure you don't click directly on the buttons themselves. These settings are going to let you choose between seeing your work in perfect detail or speeding up your computer so they can work faster. They only affect what you see while you're working. Your final video will always be saved at the highest possible quality. First, we've got high quality. When high quality is on, it looks exactly like the finished video will look, but it might play back slowly if you've got a lot going on. When high quality is off, Fusion skips some of the heavy tasks, and this can make the video play back faster, but it might not look great. The motion blur button acts like a master power switch for the entire project. Now, obviously, if you haven't turned on motion blur for any of the nodes in your project yet, this button isn't actually going to change anything. Motion blur can be a pretty intense effect, so to help you get real-time playback, you can use this button to temporarily disable motion blur on every node that's got it enabled. Now, this helps your computer render the preview much faster, and it means if you've got motion blur turned on for lots of nodes, you don't have to go through each one turning it off and on. Then you have proxy mode. Turning this on will lower the resolution of the image as it plays. So instead of processing every single pixel in the frame, it will skip a few so it's easier on your machine. Auto proxy kicks in when you're making adjustments. When you click and drag a slider to change a setting or move something in the frame, the image quality drops instantly. This helps prevent the computer from stuttering or lagging while you move things around. As soon as you let go of the mouse, the image snaps back to full detail. For both of these proxy options, you can decide how much the quality drops by going to the top menu and selecting Fusion, Fusion Settings, General, and then adjusting the sliders. While you're up there, you could also enable caching under the playback menu. But if you are going to use that, I would highly recommend you go to Resolve Settings and under User, cache management, enable it so Resolve will automatically delete these cache files after however many days you choose. Cache files can start adding up really quickly, so if you're not careful, you're going to end up with a very full hard drive if you forget to delete them. Now, the next thing that we should talk about to help speed up your work is creating templates that you can reuse. And this has also got the added benefit of letting you skip the Fusion page altogether and just tweak things directly on the edit page. Resolve already comes with a bunch of them. If you open up the effects panel on the edit page, you can see a ton of transitions, titles, generators, and effects that are actually just Fusion compositions. I'm going to grab a generator and throw it on the timeline. When I select it, you can see all the controls they've got enabled in the inspector, so you can tweak it right here on the edit page. But if I open it in Fusion by pressing this icon right here, I can right-click and open up this group of nodes and see exactly how they built it. It's a really cool way to learn how Fusion works, because you can take things that they've built and deconstruct and reverse engineer them to figure out exactly what's going on. Now let's see how to make one of these from scratch. In this example, I've made a fairly simple lower third. The bar animates in, the name gets revealed, and then the second line of text below. Now imagine this is for a client, so you've got a style that you need to stick to. That means you always have to use the same font and the same colors and the same animation, but obviously you need to be able to change what the text says. I'm going to select all the nodes except for the media out node, right-click on one of them, and go to Macro, Create Macro. That's going to open up the macro editor panel. This is where we're going to select the parameters that we want to have available on the edit page. Now, depending on what nodes you've used and how many, this thing could look like a real mess, but basically, it's just showing you every single possible parameter for every node you've got selected, so you're likely going to ignore most of them. I need to find the text nodes and then select the parts I want the edit page to be able to change. And this is probably a good time to remind you, it's always a good idea to label your nodes as you work, so it's super obvious which one you're looking for. Here's the first one, and I'm going to open up the text section. I'm going to enable this style text part, which is the box in the inspector where you actually write the words. I'm going to rename it Name. I'm not going to touch anything like the font or color controls because they need to stay consistent, but I will enable the size controls and the tracking. Sometimes people have got really long names, so I've got to make sure all of the letters fit. Then I'm going to do the same for the second line of text where the job title will go. I'll enable the style text section and call that job title, and I'll enable the size and tracking controls. Here at the top, we're going to give the macro a name, so we'll keep it simple and we'll say lower third client X. And then in this three-dot menu, there are a couple of options. So I'm going to make this macro twice to show you the major difference. First, I'll hit save, and I'll need to navigate to the right folder that will let this show up on the edit page. So instead of saving it in the macros folder we've been using, we're going to go to the templates folder. Now, depending on what you've done in the past, there is a chance that some of these next folders aren't actually going to exist on your system, so you're going to have to create them. Just make sure you name any folders exactly as I've done it here. Within templates, you should have a folder called edit, and if not, create it. Within that, there should be 4 different folders, named effects, generators, titles, and transitions, which are the 4 different sections that are available on the edit page. Again, if you don't have them, make them. Since this is the lower third, I'm going to select the titles folder, and I'll create a folder within that called Client X just for organization purposes and hit save. Then I'm going to do the same thing again, but this time in the 3-dot menu, I'm going to select Save as Group. I'll navigate to the same titles folder, and I'll add the word group to the end of the name just to be clear which is which. Now I'll head to the edit page, open up the effects panel, and I'll look in the effects section. If everything has worked, then I should see a subfolder in there called Client X. Now, if you don't see anything here, as I mentioned before, you might need to restart Resolve. It does seem to just depend on the day if this works automatically or not, so sometimes a restart will give it that kick in the bum it needs to refresh. I've got these 2 presets I created, and I'm going to drag them both onto my timeline. If I select either one of them in the inspector, you'll see the couple of controls that I'd selected and nothing else. But there is one major difference between the 2. Let's say we've been working with this new template for a while, but then the client comes back and then they say, actually, we've changed the font that we use in our system, so you need to update it. No problem, we'll just open it back up in Fusion and make the tweak. But if I open this first one up back in the Fusion page, all I see is one node and that's it. And I've lost access to all the different parts that made up my graphic. However, if I open up the one I saved as a group, if you look closely, you can actually see it's just a few nodes stacked on top of each other. This is a node group. If I right click on it, I can choose to expand the group, and that lets me see what's inside. Or I can choose to ungroup the nodes, and the tree will just go back to normal. Now I can make whatever changes I want to the original nodes. This isn't going to affect the preset that was already made. I'll have to select my nodes, find the attributes I want to show on the edit page, and then create another preset. If you didn't save it as a group, but you need to make a change, there's one little hack I want to show you. You see, these settings files are actually just tiny little text documents, and that means you can edit them in a text editor. Let's open up the first one, and you'll see a bunch of lines of code. Up near the top, you'll see the phrase macro operator. All we need to do is select the word macro and replace it with the word group, and make sure there's no space between group and operator. Then hit save and close it. Now back in Resolve, we can add it to our timeline again, and when we open it up in Fusion, we'll see it is indeed a group of nodes that we can expand and edit as much as we like. Then we just need to export the new version of the macro so we can use this new version in the edit page. Now, there's one really annoying thing I want to talk about when it comes to making all these macros, and that's the macro editor, because honestly, it's a bit crap. The UI is clunky, and it's basically impossible to customize the layout of the controls that you're choosing. The order that the controls are going to show up is completely dependent on the order that you selected the nodes. And even within a single node, you've got no control over the order of the different controls in your finished macro. You have to open it up in a text editor, then you start tweaking the code within there. But a few weeks ago, I was watching some videos by Matt McCool here on YouTube, and he was showing off a free web tool he's released called MacroLab. I don't know Matt personally, I've just seen the videos he's put out on his own channel and some of the work he's done for motion VFX. But honestly, I don't think I'm ever going to use the built-in editor again after seeing this. Now, I'm not going to do a full-on tutorial because you should watch his videos, and I'm going to link to those below. Also, he keeps making improvements, so I don't want this to get out of date too quickly, but very basically, it works like this. You build your title or your generator or whatever it is you're making, then you select your nodes, accept the media out, and hit Command or Control and C to copy them to your clipboard. Then head to macrolab.app and paste them in, or just upload a .setting file if you already have one. Then you can start picking the controls you want to reveal. It's easy to search for nodes and controls, reorder them, add dividers, add labels. He just added the ability to include custom instructions and URL buttons, and I'm sure it's going to keep getting better and better. Seriously, go subscribe to his channel so you can see what he's been building. He's doing amazing work. Now, I also know that the very talented Patrick Stirling is working on something similar called Macro Machine. Now, that's not out in the world as of this recording, but definitely keep an eye on his channel for that too. In either case, you shouldn't ever have to deal with a macro editor again, so happy days. Now, if you found this video useful, you're going to find plenty more Resolve tips and tricks right here on this channel, just like these. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.